Hi, I'm Christian and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be breaking down light meters. We're going to talk about your in-camera light meter and how this compares to a handheld light meter and your light meter apps that you get on your phone. So I'm going to try and take all of the guesswork out of metering your light so that everything is predictable and you're not fixing everything in post or just gambling on what you end up with. So I want to start by just talking about light meters, what they do and how they work. So inside your camera there is a light meter, and your camera is going to try and suggest settings that will take your exposure to your midpoint. So let's call that 5 out of 10. So every time your camera meters for the light, it is going to try and put your brightest spots in that 5. So that gives us a pretty good starting exposure for a scene. But what happens if we want to photograph something in the snow? Then it's going to bring everything down and it's going to make your subject look very, very dull. Or if you're trying to do something in the dark, everything else is going to be overexposed and it's going to take away that mood that you're probably trying to get from said scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk and have a look to see how this works and how to evaluate this and bring it to make sure that your creativity isn't hindered by the automatic machine that we're using. So what we need to do is put our camera into manual mode and then have a look through the viewfinder to see whether our scene is bright or dark and how to balance this so that we get the perfect shot for what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to work you through my simple manual workflow, and with this technique you're always going to kind of end up with a great exposure. Not first time round, but it kind of it works in steps. So what you want to do is evaluate your scene. What are you taking a photo of? So this dictates your shutter speed. If something is very, very fast, you want to increase your shutter speed. If something is very, very slow, static, you're using a tripod, that shutter speed can come right down. If you're using a shutter speed and you're taking portraits of a sitting subject, you can go 1/60. And then that allows a lot more of the ambient light to come in. And it increases the amount that you can have in focus. And with portraiture, I think that is very, very important, although there are a lot of people that will disagree with me where they shoot at 1.4 and that's all they really do. Anyway, so with this kind of method, you're setting your shutter speed and then you set your aperture to kind of understand how much light you actually, how much focus you actually want from that scene. So in a bright sunny day, I've got a subject in front of me. It's a portraiture, so I'm going to go 1/125. My aperture, I'm going to go up to about f12, f14, just because obviously it's very, very bright. And then I'm going to set my ISO down at about 100. But this does mean that the harsh shadows, so it gives it a lot more contrast. But that way you are just kind of going in step process to try and get your shutter speed, try and get your exposure correct. If you don't have any reflection or anything like that, with ISO 100, your darks are going to be too dark. So you need to increase that a little bit. So it's about working with these 3 different points, but it gives you a starting point to know how you want to expose everything. So after you have got all your settings locked in, now is time to take your first test shot. So after you've taken your first test shot, what you want to do is have a look at your histogram. And then from this, you can see where your settings are working and where they're not. There we go. From this scene, I know that I actually exposed it quite well. I am clipping a little bit in the black. That is because I've taken a shot of some shadows over here. So I've got bright versus very, very dark. The dynamic range in this scene in itself is going to be too much for a camera to hold. So I know that this scene, I need to boost up the ISO to be able to get some more detail into those shadows. So this is very, very important when you are taking shots in direct sunlight and you don't actually have much control over the amount of light in the darkness. If you have reflectors and artificial light, you actually have a lot more control over these dark areas, and you can boost the light naturally rather than through the ISO, which is another way of the camera's compensation of light and information that it doesn't actually have. So it is guesswork from the camera. Now let's talk about light meters. These are extremely useful when you want consistent, repeatable results without all of the guesswork. They measure basically the incident light on a subject rather than the reflective light. So this is the light that falls on the subject rather than the light that actually is reflected, which, you know, most of your apps and your in-camera light meter read. So it is not fooled by very, very light environments, and it isn't, it's going to work well in those dark, moody places where it's going to give you exactly what you need, and you can analyze the scene to make sure that at different points in the scene, your dynamic range is within the camera's capability of capturing all of that information. So this will give you a very, very good starting exposure, and then if you want, you can tweak it when you're shooting at the same time. So let's talk about how to use one of these things. What you want to do is have your basic settings that you actually want to control. So if you know exactly how much depth of field that you want, it will give you your shutter speed. If you know that you've got a very fast moving subject and you want to have that as your base setting. So I've dialed in my shutter speed that I'm using. Now I just need to change my ISO to ensure that I have got the settings that I used on my camera. So now I'm going to go over and expose and find out what aperture is perfect for the shades in the dark areas of my photo. And then after you've got your settings from your light meter, just dial those straight into your camera, and then you are going to get that perfect exposure for that scene. And this is going to be set on that 5 of that grayscale. So my favorite time to actually use a light meter is when I'm in the studio and I want to combine flash with ambient light. So this takes out all of the guesswork for this practice. So basically you can understand the ambient light requirements from your studio, and then what you do is you walk around the scene and understand at what point it's going to be a perfect shot, and then you add in the flash at a later time, and then you can understand the amount of flash required for that perfect shot to fit into that scene that you've actually already metered for that perfect kind of feel, whether it's bright, moody, or anything in between. This in itself will take away all of the guesswork, so you're not kind of tweaking the flash and then taking a test shot, tweaking the flash, taking a test shot, because speaking from experience, it takes time, it takes energy, and unless you have someone helping you, it could be the model standing in front of that light, and well, let's face it, when you've got the model there, you want to be shooting. So I quickly wanted to touch on apps for using as a light meter. They are actually very, very useful, and if you don't actually have a light meter yet, they will fill a big hole as they do kind of analyze the reflective light, as we discussed earlier. And there are a couple of apps and producers that have a little bit that fit on the bottom with a dome, and then that will read the incident light as well. So if you want to go down that route, I've never tried it, but it's very, very interesting for me to understand. If any of you have tried it, I'd love to know how they work and if they are actually comparable to a proper fully integrated light meter. So they are great but they do have their limitations. So they're not going to be able to handle flash, and the white balance from the apps is only approximate. So obviously you want the calibration card as well. But for a starting kind of person who doesn't actually have one yet, a very, very good handy thing. And especially with film photography where you don't always actually have the built-in light meter as well, this is actually a very, very good start if you don't actually want to jump all the way in, because I know light meters in themselves are very, very expensive. So there is a simple exercise that you can kind of use to lock in this skill. What I want you to do is you need to go and pick a scene and maybe a couple of varying scenes. I want you to put the camera in manual mode. Then you need to choose your shutter speed and your aperture, and then use different light metering modes to lock in what ISO you need for this scene, and then maybe tweak it with a -1 stop and then a +1 stop as well, and then compare these two images, or three images actually, so you can kind of understand that what your metering mode will give you as a mid ground in your mid grey tones, and then what a -1 stop and then a +1 stop will give you. You can notice the difference of color saturation, the amount of noise in photos, how the amount of light in the overexposed or underexposed parts, and how your camera deals with that information. I'm quite lucky in the fact that this camera deals with very, very bright and very, very dark parts of my image, and I can bring those in post-processing. So that really dictates how I take the photo at the start, because I know what I can do with that information on my computer after it's taken. So we're going away from getting the perfect image first time round, because sometimes the dynamic range of a scene is so large that you actually need to compensate for both the top and bottom end, and then kind of try and squish it all into the middle, so that you can open it up again in post-production and actually highlight what parts of the scene you want to bring out and move backwards and forwards, just to ensure that you're just getting that perfect exposure for what you want and what you know your camera can provide you. So mastering manual mode is not all about having that photographer's instinct right from the start. It's about knowing what tools you have at your disposal and being able to use those efficiently right from the get-go. It's your meter, your histogram, and just knowing when to follow this information, when to use it, and when to ignore it to be able to get the most out of your scene. You can use tools like a handheld light meter, and this is going to speed things up and will give you a better understanding of how scenes work, but not essential tools for learning photography. I'm going to leave some links in the description for the light meter and the apps that I actually personally use myself. I just want to make it clear that these are affiliate links. But I have not been endorsed by any of these companies. I have not been in contact with any of these companies. These are what I use on a day-to-day basis. So if you have any questions about light meters, metering with flash, or studio situations and you want to ask, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will ensure that I do a specific episode on whatever you kind of bring up to make you understand exactly what I talked about today. Thank you.